8 out of 10 global leaders think they need multi-generational workforces for growth.
How do I measure the impact of what I'm doing?
I was struggling with kind of what to do next professionally. And he coached me and said, go find your calling. And it wasn't about career, it wasn't about job, it was calling. Stay aligned to the right purpose. As a leader, that strategic direction from you is vital to the rest of your organization.
People like to say, have a good day. And it's a nice sentiment. But it's a fixed perspective that can put a lot of pressure on us. It's also really hard to define from person to person. What about instead if we ask ourselves, how can I have a better day? At work, at home, in life? That's what this show is all about. The Have a Better Day podcast comes to you from Boon, a personalized coaching platform that helps businesses everywhere to support the whole humans, which are their employees. We have our pulse on what employees are dealing with in today's workplace, and we want to share those insights with you. Welcome to the Have a Better Day podcast. Welcome back to the Have a Better Day podcast. I'm your host, Alex Simmons. Today we are venturing into a topic that, we're seeing pretty universally across workplaces today, and that is cross-generational communication challenges. And really, as workplaces continue to become more diverse in age, remote versus hybrid, whatever it is, inclusive communication completely cross-generationally has become more critical than ever. So Shee Shee, I'm really excited to have you with us. An amazing coach at Boon with more than 4 decades of experience in multiple countries, leveraging communication expertise to develop leaders from startups to C-suite. And Shee Shee, you also have a really unique perspective on this topic personally, growing up as the youngest of 8 kids in a multi-generational family. So Shee Shee, it's an honor to have you here with us today. And maybe just as a starting point, Shee Shee, if you can just give everybody a background on, your journey into coaching and more specifically kind of how that dovetails into the topic we're hitting on today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. And I'm really happy to be here and especially pleased to be talking about this topic. It's one of my passions and has been for a long time. As you pointed us to, I grew up in a multi-dimensional home and family. And part of that experience was also informed by my mother's experience because my mother grew up in a really, really, really big home with, I think there were 20 something family members that lived there of multiple generations. And she loved that and always talked about how much she benefited from speaking to and learning from and engaging with folks of all different ages, from babies up to 90, or I think one of her elders lived to be close to 100. So that informed that experience. And then my coaching journey, I like to say that I was coaching before it was a term and long before it was cool. I started coaching in one of my earliest professional positions, and I'm definitely dating myself here, but it was in the late 80s. And I was working in consulting, and I had clients asking me for advice or what should they do? And I said, I don't know what to tell you to do. I don't work in your industry. You have the answers. And I think I'm just going to keep asking you questions until those answers bubble to the surface.
Yeah. And I feel like that story is, so consistent with so many of the coaches I talked to today, where it's kind of this organic, I think I was just coaching people, just naturally through my day to day. And I all of a sudden became this person that people were asking questions to, and you became this mentor naturally. And then all of a sudden, you make it a little bit more formalized through different coaching certifications and whatnot. But I guess, was there a moment where you felt that, this topic in particular really came up for you from a coaching lens, where it was like, this is really, there's kind of been a big shift we've seen in just the prevalence and how frequently this sort of challenge is coming up, particularly in today's workplace. Like, is that a COVID thing that we're seeing? Is that just more generations in the workplace? Like, what are you seeing today around us?
It's more generations in the workplace for sure. And then also we're bringing more of ourselves to the workplace. COVID sped that up. It was already happening, but we're showing up more as who we really are. And there's a permission there and a welcomeness to, I don't necessarily want this total separation, this iron curtain between my professional life and my personal life, that certainly professional life has bled into personal life for a while. And now with, especially as a result of COVID and, naked toddlers running across the screen, that the Zoom screen, that it happened the other way as well. And you asked me a question, and I actually want to circle back to it because I think it's important, because I hadn't even considered it. But you asked me the question about a moment or experience that really influenced my going into this direction of coaching. And there are two moments. So one of them was that I was coached unofficially by my younger son when he was in undergrad, and I was struggling with kind of what to do next professionally. And he coached me and said, go find your calling. Sure. And it wasn't about career. It wasn't about job. It was calling. And so that spoke to me about this. He's a Gen Z, and this generation and what they value and what's important to them. And then way back in my career, I worked for an organization, a pretty significant financial organization. And I was brought in by the CEO, who remains my favorite boss ever, to bring leadership development and teams work and coaching into this organization. And I actually, in my notes, when I was doing notes for this podcast, it came out to be R versus, and I had not remembered this man's name. And then it came to me, versus Herman. So R, a boomer, Herman, silent generation. And my office was in an annex, and we had a silent generation represented there, different person, boomer represented there, and then myself, I identify as Gen X. And just the difference in the tenor of the space when I was over in the big building with these multi-generations and all this toxic energy versus in our little annex where we were openly communicating, we were creating safe space, we were inviting one another to bring our whole selves to the workplace, and just that difference. So that's really what got me started in thinking about this.
It's so interesting. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, you talk about inviting this whole self to work and this blurred line between personal and professional. Obviously, that's so core to what we're doing at Boone, and our whole value prop is tied to the idea that what employees are really looking for is sitting at this intersection between personal and professional, and that type of support is really what we feel like is leveling people up into the best possible employee. So you talk about Gen Xers and the silent generation. I've talked to a lot of employers recently. They're trying to figure out, how do I think about the generational differences between, a Gen Z talking to a baby boomer or even the millennial generation, which, those two generations now make up a majority of the workforce. So talk us through, what are some use cases that you're seeing, especially with the younger generation? I think you're seeing employees of all different age demographics with Boone, but then in your own private business, what are you seeing as some of the common challenges in those areas?
So there's an organization called the Gottman Institute, and they work a lot in relationship education. And they have something that they refer to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And it's criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. And when any of us of any generation, age group, cultural experience, gender ID, race, geography, et cetera, when we bring those to any relationship, and in particular to the workplace, it just doesn't go well. And the stats back that up, and the stats of a multi-generational workforce are also, all the numbers tell us that it's not going away. It's not going anywhere. And that when we lean into it, 8 out of 10 global leaders, for instance, I think this study was something called the Living, Learning, and Something Collaborative.
Yeah.
8 out of 10 global leaders think they need multi-generational workforces for growth.
Yeah. And I would expect that to continue to be the case. I mean, we definitely work with more progressive organizations at
Mhm.
Boone where there are we work with companies where it's exclusively Gen Z and millennial, but for the most part, it's anywhere from first year out of college to that baby boomer generation. What are some of the impacts that you're seeing from like not necessarily having that same connectivity in person, and now it's working remotely? Like what are some of the, I guess, miscommunications that are happening or challenges that are arising out of that?
A lot of factors at play. And this is also one thing I think it's important to note is we are completely generalizing here. So there are certainly folks that might fall under a certain birth year that don't identify with that generation's typical way of functioning or communicating.
Yep.
And it's really about communication issues. That's what I'm seeing
Yep.
is lack of trust caused by misalignment of language, of seemingly of priorities, of approaches, of the value that's placed on work and what that's like. Yeah. So I have some notes I'm going to check over here because I
Yeah.
really appreciated the way that this worked out. But
Yeah.
for pre-boomers, work was survival. For boomers, work was and is credibility, cachet. And for Xers, work is work. Millennials, work is ethics. And for Gen Z, work is meaning, but
Yep.
life has more meaning. And so when you think about that mix in one workplace, and especially when we're not necessarily in person,
Yep.
some of us are hybrid. Some of us are like the early finance organization that I mentioned. We had a different building. So we were in
Yep.
effect remote. We were using phones with cords
Yep.
even then. But there's just a disconnect that
Yep.
occurs. And unless we're being active and intentional about bringing people together, whether it's on video calls or for me, always preferably in person at
Yeah.
points, and creating psychological safety and a willingness and a welcomeness to dialogue and have open conversations and see one another for who we are beneath our and beyond our age, our gender, our race, our geographic origin. When we can't get to that point, it's just a mess.
Yeah. And I guess unpack that part a little bit more. Like, obviously there's the different generations and kind of how that's causing misalignment and all of these things. What are some of the like tangible challenges that you are seeing surface in the workplace beyond the miscommunication? Like, is it lower productivity for these employees who are younger and are now becoming disengaged because they can't, build those connections with senior leaders? Or like, what are some of the impacts that you're seeing by not effectively addressing this? Unpack that chaos a little
Yeah,
bit. I totally see it.
definitely lower productivity, impacts to the bottom line, less efficiency, um, more frustration, lack of engagement, lack of willingness to put oneself out there when they don't feel that there's trust. All of
Yep.
this impacts not only employees and particularly employees, but it also impacts clients and
Mhm.
how it feels to be at work, whether
Yep.
you're at your desk on your computer or whether you're in an office. And then how that ripples out to family members, friends, colleagues. I mentioned clients and other organizations that, we're all interconnected. And so when
Yep.
one of us is feeling that sense of either being stifled or lack of ambition, lack of recognition,
Yep.
that it just bleeds out and impacts the world.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely think we're seeing all of those things play out in a number of different ways. I think it's something something I've always, I don't know why my mind went to this, but I was just like, what do you say to the the boomer who's, they're kind of at the later stage of their
Mhm.
career. They're not changing in their ways. They view this new, bring your whole self to work as nonsense in certain instances. It's more of like an old school way of thinking about the workplace. What do you say to those people when you're having these kinds of conversations? Like, is that just kind of is it a lost cause in that circumstance where you're just like you're going to be dealing with these cultural challenges? Like, is there anything to address that type of individual?
Well, I'm a coach, so it's never a lost cause.
There you go.
There's
That's
always
fair.
opportunity for growth, for fulfillment, etc. One of my favorite questions to ask in a situation like that would be, what do you want?
Yeah.
And then what I see and hear, reflect that back to them and say, is dissatisfaction and frustration. And you're still working for
Yep.
however long you choose to be here. So what do you want to make out of this time? And what's your legacy?
Yep.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave? La 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 la, not listening, or I'm too old for this, or past this, or I have nothing to offer, I'm dried up, they're not interested, etc. There's so much opportunity there. And
Yep.
especially the older folks, they've got wisdom, they've got experience, they've got perspective on their side. They have a unique ability to be able to step back out of the chaos and name what's really happening and what's
Yep.
really important. And then the
Yep.
younger folks have this energy and this drive and this enthusiasm and this take no prisoners sense of, our world is messed up and we have to take some action in order to fix it. So
Right.
what can I do here today in this moment? And then also both ends, how can we support those folks in the middle that really are
Yep.
sandwiched between work obligations and family obligations and aging parents and kids trying to learn remotely and making a mortgage payment or trying to save to be able to buy a house to make a mortgage payment? All of this, there's so much
Yep.
support that can be offered.
And so, yeah, and that's one of the things we've been talking a lot about is like, where can you create the most impact at scale? Is it with, if you could only choose one, that younger generation, more senior leadership, or the manager level, where do you start focusing your energy? And where we've really leaned is really focusing in that manager capacity and you just kind of mentioned that's the sandwich,
Mm-hmm.
the sandwich sort of generation in all of this, which is kind of ironic that what we've seen is if you're able to level those people up and
Mm-hmm.
make them feel supported and growing within the organization, they're going to have the biggest ripple effect across the organization. So, it is kind of this maze of, how do you make all of these generations feel supported in all of this? And so I guess the $1 million question, Shee Shee, like what are some, I guess, tangible, so that, if you're an HR leader listening to this, or even an employee wanting to come back into your own workplace, like what are a few things that you've seen work really well that are somewhat easily implementable today?
So for everyone, it's about humanity and reaching for healthier high performance. For younger folks, I think leaning into the idea that this is about diversity, this is about fairness, and this is about the law. That might be more for some older folks, right? Or more seasoned in their career. Embrace diversity and appeal to it. So, for instance, with comms, with communications, using email, social media, messaging apps, video conferencing, in person communication, phone communication, and consider the human on the other side of that communication. So, if I know, for instance, that you prefer video conferencing and I go to your calendar, I'm going to try to book you onto a
Yeah.
video call. If you're great with, I'm not sure about mentioning products by name here, but if your preferred method is something that's a clothesline that's a little weak and dripping down, then
Yeah.
communicate with you that way.
Yep.
And there are also, I mentioned those four horsemen of the apocalypse. There are also antidotes that are mentioned to those. So appreciation, using that in the workplace, whether you're in the middle and appreciating up, appreciating down, taking responsibility. That the Coactive Training Institute says that leaders take responsibility for their world. And I hold that we are all leaders. There are leaders at every level in every organization. Caring
Yep.
for yourself, caring for others. Again, just being human, bringing humanity into the workplace or back to the workplace if we've kind of forgotten about it. And then I have a methodology that I use that I call ABC. And it's A's and B's and C's because I just like simple formulas. I can't remember complex stuff. So
Love it.
A's are avoid assuming, ask. And B's are ban bias and go for belonging. C's are canceling, co-create together. And it's
Yeah.
just ABC and whatever works for you. If you can create something from the acronym STOP,
Yeah.
S is speaking and P is perspective and fill in somewhere in the middle, something that can impact you as a human to see the other person on the other side of this as human.
Yeah.
And how can I relate to them in ways that they can receive it?
Yeah. Those are all great. And I think, something you mentioned earlier, which I kind of came back to, was just acknowledging the different generational differences that do exist today. Like even saying that out loud and being able to highlight, like, these are what this generation thinks about when they come into the workplace. Like Gen Z is meaning of work and this is what they value, and talking about those values, that in and of itself to me is such like an easy place to start, and just getting those differences out into the open and being able to set some expectations based on those differences. That just feels like another easy way to get some of this stuff implemented. And honestly, it feels like it's something that you might think is really obvious, but I have not seen a lot of companies taking that action either.
No, an open dialogue.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to come at this with assumptions, and we want to come at this with, okay, I think I have some idea of what generation you are and why that matters. So the environmental and political and sociological situation, historical, to which you were born and raised absolutely impacts us. Nevertheless, if you were raised in Texas,
Yep.
it will have impacted you differently, that decade or two, than if you were raised in India. And so don't come to the conversation with assumptions. Ask, check for understanding, check for impact, and share those assumptions. The famous feedback model of COIN, which is really simple, but context first, observation, impact. So you're in the context and the observation, you're sharing. Hey, I assumed this. And was I right or wrong about that? You tell me.
Yep.
And then, I'm assuming, for instance, that because you're sandwiched and given your work experience and what I make up is your age, I assume that you're a millennial. I assume that, that you're, while not a digital native, you're far more comfortable with that format than am I, for instance, as an Xer or your direct report who's a boomer, because, that's flipped now too, that there's a significant number of managers who are now managing folks that are older than they are.
Yeah. And I think that's so key. And I think more broadly, that's a theme that we are trying to solve at Boone, which is how do you personalize care at scale? And I think this is like one of those areas where it's like, how are you thinking about all of these generations differently throughout? So many good nuggets in there, Shee Shee. And I guess, so thinking about that on a personal level, like what can I bring back into my workplace? A couple of really good things in there. And then I guess thinking more organizationally, if I'm an HR leader or C-suite exec trying to create impact at scale across my organization, what would you say are some good things that you can implement that are going to be impactful on day one?
Great question, Alex. So I think there are three categories. And the first, I would say, is meet your people where they are and who they are. Know your audience, in other words. And the most important aspect of that is respect. Respecting their education, their experience, their skills, their position in life, that they have a life outside of work. Ask and listen. Create those safe forums. We've mentioned that a couple times. Be
Yep.
open. Be open to feedback, be open to dialogue, be open to ideas of how you as a leader can create the kind of environment that is welcoming to all generations. Stay aligned to the right purpose. As a leader, that strategic direction from you is vital to the rest of your organization. Get
Yep.
educated. That would be the second one. Understand generational influences and the differences and the impact that change has on these different age groups. And then the third thing I would say is inclusive structure. Create a system of compensation and benefits. Hello, Boone. Great benefit that a lot of organizations offer their employees. FMLA, reskilling for employees, menopause support, grandparent leave, all sorts of things like this that can be included in a benefits package.
Yep.
Flexible work, whether that's hybrid or flex scheduling, that some folks work better in the evenings than they do in the morning. Job share is a great opportunity, and even workplace design, lighting, furnishings, the perks, like the drip 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 of the coffee machine.
Yeah.
Have things like that if you're in person.
Yep.
Those would be my most critical ideas for leaders.
Yeah, and I think to that end, one of the things that I'm always talking about with HR leaders and just senior leaders in general is like, how do I measure the impact of what I'm doing? And is there any sort of way to like see ROI around this sort of stuff? So like, if you were to implement some of these changes, what would be some of the things you would be looking for as a way of like, was this successful? Am I
Mhm.
actually creating change, or is it anecdotal at the end of the day?
Productivity, engagement, retention, boomeranging. So the folks who leave and realize the grass really isn't greener, and I
Yep.
want to come back and have an impact here where it really matters. And oftentimes, if you have a client base, ask your clients
Yep.
what the result is. Do some anonymous surveying before you implement some of these changes and then after you implement them.
Yep.
And I think especially retention, it costs a lot of money to bring in a new person and retrain. Onboarding is a lengthy,
Oh yeah.
costly process. So if you could
Yeah.
keep someone leaving, or someone who's close to retirement from staying a little bit longer because you've offered them a flex schedule and a benefit of some grandparent leave because they're
Yeah.
responsible for the care of a grandchild, golden.
Yeah. A lot of customers, I mean, retention is so core to what we're always talking about. And there's a lot of data out there. It's tough to say exactly how much it costs, but we've seen anywhere from a half to two times the average salary of that person who's leaving. So, when we look at Boone, we found that Boone users are more than 50% less likely to turn over than non-Boone users. So when we think about that stat, it's really like, hey, if we can help you keep one or two or three people, it pays for itself in
Yeah.
that sort of way. So,
And keep one or two or three of the right people, because
oh,
certainly
exactly.
someone who's dissatisfied, has lower productivity, it isn't
100%.
yeah, it isn't, if they're not happy in the work that they're doing or fulfilling their purpose, they're not fulfilling the organization's purpose.
Yeah, 100%. So, Shee Shee, I know one thing that we're seeing a lot of in the workplace today is just such a stark difference in values cross generationally and how much of a role that plays in all of this conversation. So, I guess, do you have any like overview or guide on just how you think about the different values and how that plays a role in this conversation?
I love where you're pointing, Alex, about values around work and the workplace and the meaning of work and the purpose of it. For many pre-boomers, work was survival, and that they had to have a job and some form of income in order to survive. Think depression and world
Yep.
wars. For boomers, work was and is credibility. It's cachet, where they work, what their position is, how high they went in an organization. If an entrepreneur, if they started their own company that was successful. For Gen X, like me, work is work. And it can mean a lot of different things, or it can mean that work is work. Millennials, work is often ethics and all the ethical questions that come into play there and the balancing of work and et cetera. Gen Z, work is meaning, but life has more meaning.
It's interesting because I'm like thinking back to some personal anecdotes around, like, I look at my dad and I feel like he was like an entrepreneur by heart, and I feel like he definitely had more of that survivor mentality. I think about my father-in-law, same sort of thing, and then I look at myself. I'm like, is my value really like ethic? I don't know if I'm a traditional millennial. I know I fit into that category, but I may identify more with like the boomer generation. I don't know. I feel like I'm an older soul, anyways. So.
You are an older soul. Yeah.
I'm
And we
soul.
all flex a little bit, right? And
Exactly.
some of it depends on the influences that we have. All of my siblings are boomers. They are absolutely boomers. I am absolutely not. And yet we grew up in the same home with the same parents.
Yep. That's what makes it a melting pot, right?
Mm-hmm. Makes it wonderful.
That's the best part about it. Yeah. Awesome. So I am so happy and so excited to be continuing to roll out these podcasts, which, we really feel like we, in a way, have our pulse on what's going on around what employees are dealing with today in the workplace through our amazing coaches like Shee Shee. And so I'm really excited to just continue this initiative where we're kind of touching on these hot buttons in future episodes. So if you have any thoughts around what topics you like to see or what you're seeing a lot of in your workplace, feel free to throw a comment in the LinkedIn post. Otherwise, if you want to learn more about Boone, feel free to check us out at boone-health.com. And if you want to learn more about Shee Shee or looking to chat with her further, Shee Shee, where do we find you?
The easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm one of only 2 Shee Shees, and I'm not the human lawyer, whatever that is. So I'm the leadership development and coach facilitator.
Yeah, well, that seems like the best way to do it. I am not one of 2 Alexes, so yeah. If you go to LinkedIn, Alex Simmons, look for Boone, and we can connect there. But looking forward to staying in touch with all of you.
Yeah. And if you go to LinkedIn, look for Shee Shee Van Inwagen, the Generations Whisperer. Somebody just titled me that the other day. Yeah.
There you go. Love it.